Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Purdue's bye week has arrived as the Boilermakers desperately need a week to recharge for the rest of the season. Purdue certainly hoped for better than a 2-5 start, but here on the show today, we will look back at the first 7 games with some highs, some lows, and look ahead to the final 5 games. What does Purdue need to accomplish to wrap up Ryan Walters' first season in West Lafayette? We'll break all of that down here from the first 7 games of the season here today before answering some of your questions. Before we get going real quick, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at BoilersBeyond if you don't already. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You'll want to do both of those because on Thursday night, I will be recording the Purdue basketball preview episode for this season. Always one of the more popular episodes that I do each year. I've sent out the tweet for Q&A for that. Send in any questions you have about Purdue basketball, and I will answer them on that show. It's going to be a long one. That's okay. Send anything in you have, and we will get it all answered. You can tweet those questions to me at BoilersBeyond. You can DM them to me there, or you can also email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. I will be recording that Thursday night. I'll be out of town over the weekend, hence why I'm recording it early, and then that will post first thing on Monday morning. So that's something that you can be looking forward to as well. But back to football here. It's not been the best start to the season for Purdue. The bye week comes at the best possible time, if you ask me. Purdue's beaten up really badly. Injuries have taken its toll on a team that really can't afford any, a team that's rather limited to start with. Look, Purdue's 2-5 overall. Purdue's 1-3 in Big Ten play. This is not overwhelmingly shocking. I know there were some really high expectations out there for some coming into this season, and to a certain degree, it was justified. Purdue had come off 2 really good seasons in a row. Now, Purdue had lost a lot of the key contributors from those 2 teams. However, Purdue had still won 17 games over the past 2 years. Purdue had not done that in a really long time. Purdue had gotten some good momentum on the recruiting trail over the summer, and that tends to bleed into fall camp. It can be difficult to separate the two at times. Purdue certainly, hired a coach with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy in Ryan Walters, and he got the fan base to buy in, no doubt about it. And I think as a whole, the fan base is still bought in. But what I will say is so far, Purdue has not had the best year. Let's keep something in mind here. The win total coming into the season was set at 5.5 in Vegas. It's not like, the pros expected this team to be competing for a Big Ten West title, if we're being honest here. That's not what was expected of Purdue at all. This is a team that, if it overachieved by a slight bit, could be a bowl team. And that's still mathematically possible for Purdue as it enters the back end here. I wanted to look at some things that have gone well for Purdue so far through the first 7 games, as well as some problems that have really held Purdue back before looking at where Purdue goes from here. To start things off, Tyrone Tracy's conversion to running back has been a really big positive for Purdue so far. A guy who, for his first 5 years, played wide receiver. 4 years at Iowa, 1 year at Purdue. Now, for his 6th and final year of eligibility, moved to running back, and he's been really solid so far. Just shy of 6 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns, over 300 yards rushing, I believe. Let's see, close to it. He's at 296. He's been really good. He also had a kick return touchdown in the season opener. Has caught a few passes out of the backfield. And keep in mind, At one point, he had taken over the top running back role from Devin Maccabee. Now, Tracy got hurt in the first half against Iowa. Maccabee has looked very good ever since. But Tyrone Tracy has been a really nice story for Purdue here. You always want to see seniors go out on a positive note, and so far, Tyrone Tracy is doing just that. I think Deion Burks looks like someone who Purdue will absolutely want to keep as a piece of their receiving core in 2024 and moving forward. I don't know that he's a true number one wide receiver the way he is being featured right now. However, I think he's a guy who's very valuable to a receiving core moving forward. Right now, Purdue is asking him to do a lot. Purdue's asking him to play outside. I don't know that that's his strength, but he's done a nice job. You saw what he was capable of creating big plays against Fresno State. He's got real speed. He's a really fast guy. He's someone who I think is the best fit that Purdue has for the air raid style of passing attack. He's a good player. He's a keeper. He's someone who you will see making plays for Purdue in 2024 and moving forward. On the other side of the ball, I think Nick Scorton and Kadron Jenkins have proven to be a really nice duo of pass rushers. I don't know that Purdue has really had that great duo in a while, although, a few years back, Jenkins and George Karlaftis both had a nice season in 2021. I think this is the best Kadron Jenkins has played in his career so far. He is really finishing strong at Purdue, putting together his best season in his final season, and that's something you always want to see from guys. As I said with Tracy, he's playing some really good football for you. He's giving you some really good reps. With Nick Scorton, I do think he's still a work in progress, and that should be more exciting than anything because he's been really good so far this year. 6.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks for him, a forced fumble. He's been great. He has really shown flashes of being an overwhelming physical force. I think he's someone who's going to play on Sundays. I really do. I think he's someone who's going to play in the NFL. I think he's one of those guys who may have almost, by the time his body physically develops completely and he grows into that body and learns to play under control, he may be in the NFL by the time that point comes for him. Maybe not. Purdue may get that from him next year, but he's a guy who's been really good for you. He's a guy who has potential to be a really impactful player, both, from an all Big Ten type of player and moving forward to the NFL. And finally, rounding out some of the positives here, Dylan Thieneman is going to have a fantastic career at Purdue. From day one, he has looked like he belongs as a starter. He absolutely has looked the part, from day one when he had that pick against Fresno, when he had a heads-up play against Virginia Tech. He's been excellent. He really has been. And he's a guy, you don't see many true freshmen making that type of an impact, but he absolutely has. And Purdue's had multiple true freshmen come in and make an impact, but playing that deep safety role that's really important in Ryan Walters' defense, he's going to be the anchor of that defense for a while. I don't think it's a great thing that he's your leading tackler so far. By a mile, he's your leading tackler. 14 more tackles than Sanusi Kane, who's second on the team. But, nonetheless, he's been really good for you. 3 picks, pass breakup, going to be a great player at Purdue. It would not be fair to do this, however, for a 2-5 team without looking at some of the issues that Purdue has run into so far. Purdue has a huge lack of depth across the board. When you look at this roster, I don't know that there's a single position where Purdue is legitimately deep. Maybe at pass rusher. Maybe, at that outside linebacker spot, you have Scorton and Jenkins, you have Corday Sidnor, you have Will Helt, you have Scotty Humpick. I'll give you that, maybe. Outside of that spot, though, Purdue doesn't have depth anywhere. That's not really a surprise. Injuries are stacking up, and it's getting exposed more and more. But look, it shows a reflection of two things. Purdue is not recruited at a high enough level over the past couple years, and Purdue has not filled in the transfer portal as effectively as it needed to overcome the recruiting deficiencies. Now, I will say it's almost impossible to hit close to 1,000 out of the transfer portal. It just is. That's reality. You are going to have, probably more misses than hits out of the transfer portal when you really look at it. It is hard to build a roster that way. And Purdue is seeing the effects of that. It's had some good players transfer in. It's had some guys transfer in who haven't made an impact. But the lack of depth and the lack of high-end talent really is the biggest contributor to a 2-5 team right now. Any preseason hope of Purdue being better than expectations, 6-6, 7-5, some of those types of projections really relied on Hudson Card being at least a top half of the Big Ten quarterback, if not, in that upper echelon. Maybe a step back from J.J. McCarthy, Drew Aller, but, right up there behind him. So far, he has not been that. He's not been bad. He's completing over 60% of his passes, 230 yards per game, more touchdowns than interceptions. It's unfair to say that he's been bad, because he hasn't been. He's been solid for you, but he has not been that type of transcendent difference maker that Purdue has needed him to be. That Purdue has needed him to be that guy, that rising tide that raises all the ships around him. That's not been the case so far. Now, Hudson Card also, keep in mind, is starting for the first time in his career. He sporadically started at Texas, but this is his first year really going through the ups and downs of a season. He certainly has not been fully healthy recently. That plays a big part as well. He's not been able to utilize his legs much because he's been banged up. But look, it is what it is. If Purdue wanted to be better than this, if Purdue wants to, be better than what it's been so far, it needs higher level quarterback play than what it's gotten. Part of that, too, is that Purdue's wide receivers simply are not difference makers. I think Burks can be. I'd like to see him in the slot more, but I get why he isn't. TJ Sheffield's been fine. He had a nice game at Iowa. Abdur-Rahman Yassin's a good possession guy. But these are not difference makers who are going to be guys who create yards after the catch or who burn you over the top to create big plays. And when you don't have, the type of offensive line that you need, it's really hard to string together 10-play drives, 12-play drives, move the chains and convert 5 first downs on a drive. You need those big plays. And right now, Purdue does not create enough big plays. Again, the offensive line has really struggled. I don't know if Muhammad Musa was ever all that healthy. We'll see what his injury status looks like moving forward. Marcus Bowe is a better guard than he is tackle. I don't know what other options Purdue had, but you limited him when you moved him from guard to tackle. He's done for the year. We'll see about Musa, but you're dealing with a real banged up group of offensive linemen. Preston Nichols has been a bright spot at left guard, but as a whole, the offensive line is not great. That's nothing new for Purdue. It isn't. That's been reality for Purdue for a very long time. Most of the transfers have been just fine. Jalen Grant doesn't move the needle a whole lot. The guys behind him certainly haven't. Luke Griffin didn't play much before he got hurt. Ben Farrell's been Look, it's not a great offensive line. When you combine a quarterback who's not playing at a super high level with receivers who aren't very explosive and a mediocre offensive line, you're going to get mediocre offensive output, and overall, That's what Purdue's gotten so far, scoring 23 points per game and gaining, what do we got here, 370 yards per game. That tells the story for you. On the defensive side of the ball, I think the biggest thing that's become clear is that Purdue does not have the size up front to stop the run the way it needs to in Ryan Walters' defense. Purdue's run defense has been all right. In early weeks especially, it did a good job at stopping the traditional run, the run up the middle, the run between the tackles. Purdue did a decent job with. Purdue certainly struggled with mobile quarterbacks, but in recent weeks, Purdue's struggled more against the run. This, to me, is the biggest question about whether this can all work out schematically on defense. Because for the defense to do what Ryan Walters wants it to do, Purdue has to stuff the run early on. Purdue has to force opponents into 3rd and long. When the pass rushers can go make plays, you can pressure the quarterback and you can force him to get the ball out before the wide receivers get open against man-to-man coverage. That's what this all comes down to. But right now, Purdue is not forcing enough 3rd and long situations. And when it has forced 3rd and long, like you saw early on in the season, the defensive backs have not been good enough to cover for whatever period of time they've been asked to. All in all, the defense lacks talent, but the size up front is where I think Purdue needs to improve. You're going to face better and better offensive lines moving forward in an expanded Big Ten. You've got to get better up front because otherwise you're going to be in this situation where you're allowing teams to establish the run on you, and some of the advantages you can have are negated. Purdue's got to force teams to throw the ball, and Purdue's got to have the pass rushers to go make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. Right now, Purdue doesn't have the bodies up front. Purdue doesn't have the guys on the back end. Recruiting-wise, the guys on the back end are coming in. There are a boatload of defensive backs in this recruiting class. The size up front is going to be the hardest thing to do. It is. It is not easy to do it all. It's hard to do at a school like Purdue, but that's part of what Purdue's hiring here. That's part of what Purdue wants to do schematically. Over the final 5 games, look, Purdue needs to win 4 of these 5 to go to a bowl. One of those games is at Michigan. Anything can happen, any given Saturday, whatever. It's highly unlikely to be a win. So Purdue would need to run the table, Nebraska, Minnesota, Northwestern, Indiana, to go to a bowl game. I don't think it's likely to happen. I think it's a lot to ask of Purdue to win all of those. I think Purdue can certainly win each of them individually, but to parlay that, I don't know. I don't know that that's going to happen. Is it all that important? Look, I don't know. Bowl games are not what they used to be. There is not a whole lot of glamour in playing in, a 6-6 Big Ten bowl game, like the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, is it? That's out in Phoenix, that like a 6-6 or 7-5 team goes to. The Pinstripe Bowl out in New York, I think that's a Big Ten bowl game. These are great and all, but it's not like it's some glamorous trip. I don't know that it's all that important to simply play in a bowl game. I think you would welcome the 15 practices, but I don't think the game itself is all that important. I think for Purdue, you'd like to win these home games. If you could beat Minnesota and Indiana, it'd help you. You're getting to the point where you do want to retain season ticket holders for next year. Sending them out with a smile on their face would be a positive. The home results so far, as I talked about Saturday, you're 1-4, and only one of the losses has been super competitive. That's not great. If you can go out on a high note at home, that helps. I think in these last, from the bye week moving forward, you would like to figure out what you have from a personnel standpoint to really have a bit of a hot board going into the portal with positions of need, to really be able to say we need this amount of defensive linemen. We need this amount of wide receivers, so on and so forth. Personnel-wise, this is going to be another big cycle for Purdue. Purdue is going to add a bunch of guys through the portal. I suspect Purdue will lose a bunch of guys through the portal. Keep in mind, there is that NCAA rule that Ryan Walters has certainly used so far, where Purdue is allowed to keep guys on scholarship, but remove them from the team, and they don't count against the 85 scholarship limit. They're still on scholarship, they're still students at Purdue University, but they're not on the team anymore. That option is still there for the first 18 months. So Ryan Walters has until early May, so probably the end of spring practice, to utilize that. I think that's going to be used a ton here right after the season. Purdue's going to know what it's got. Purdue needs to work on this roster. You need to figure out the priority areas in the portal. You need to finish off the recruiting class with what you can, but I'd be wary about asking too much out of true freshmen next year. Not everyone's going to be Dylan Thieneman. It's not easy to do. I think, you need to go into that Indiana game feeling pretty confident about your next moves. Personnel-wise, I don't expect Purdue to make any staff changes, but you'd better be pretty sure about that decision if you decide to. Obviously with position coaches, it's always possible that someone moves on for a new gig. Okay, you'd probably have a decent idea if that's going to happen or not. I know so much of the conversation on Twitter, and it seems like more and more every day, is centered around disdain for Graham Harrell. I don't see it happening. I think the buyout is a big factor. I think this was a pretty all-in move by Ryan Walters to go with Graham Harrell and give him a 3-year contract to make him the highest paid assistant in Purdue football history. I think that'd be a tough pill to swallow if you fire him after year 1 there. And that would be, look, it's not the end of the world, but I don't think that would be a great reflection on Ryan Walters. I expect Graham Harrell to be back next year. I think there are enough deficiencies on the offensive side of the ball from a personnel perspective that Graham Harrell can get a pass for this. I do. Has he been perfect? No. But is it possible to be perfect with this offense? Probably not. I just think overall, the rest of this season, yes, you're playing for this year. Yes, you're playing for the seniors. You want to send them out on a good note. But you need to know exactly where you sit, that when the clock ticks off, the final minute of that bucket game, and, hopefully for Purdue, you're holding on to that thing for another year. That'd be a really disappointing end of this year to lose the bucket to a bad Indiana team. But you need a clear plan of attack to go in, to that first week of December, because from the first week of December to the season opener next year, Purdue needs to get a whole lot better very quickly. Getting into the Q&A here, starting off, there were a lot of players that haven't played much all year that played in garbage time for Purdue against Ohio State, looking specifically at Mershawn Rice and other young guys. Do you think after the bye week, Walters will play some of these guys more, start them, and or add them to a rotation? It wouldn't surprise me in general. I wonder about the receivers. You bring up Mershawn Rice. Keep in mind that Yasin was out for the game on Saturday. If he gets back and healthy, he'll slide back in. Walters was so adamant earlier on this year on his radio show, and I know I've mentioned this a few times, that even when tired, Burks, Sheffield, and Yasin were his top 3 receivers. He spoke very, very confidently about that. That makes me think that we're not going to see a ton of rotation there. Now, do we see a young guy like a Jerron Tibbs a little bit more maybe? Sure. Mershawn Rice is on his way out. Maybe you'll get him on the field a little more, but I do wonder about some of the younger guys. Jaden Dixon-Veal, the JUCO guy, do we see some more of him? He got the start in Yasin's absence on Saturday. I think on defense, you'll see more of Derek Rogers Jr. at corner. Marquise Wilson's done for the year, so you have a need. I think you'll see more of him. I think you'd like to get Will Helt some more snaps if you can, with the caveat that that's the best position on the team. So I don't know that, when you're trying to win games still, I don't know that you want to take many snaps away from Jenkins and Scorton. I don't think, especially on the offensive line, I don't think you'll see it. Guys are either ready or they're not. It's pretty clear who's ready and who's not. So that's where I kind of stand there. Had a few here from Steve, a longtime emailer. He asked, first off, in regards to Hudson Card not being what Purdue had hoped for so far, how many programs are knocking it out of the park with portal quarterbacks? And also, would Aiden O'Connell be able to succeed in this offense given the lack of weapons? Look, that's a great point. If you look across the country, there are not that many portal quarterbacks who are just lighting it up. Some of the better examples of guys who are doing well, DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon has been solid. Mikey Keene at Fresno State, he's been banged up a bit since the Purdue game, but he's been good when he's been out there. Graham Mertz has actually been all right at Florida, probably better than I expected. But overall, look, guys typically transfer for a reason. It's not easy to build a program out of the portal because guys are usually leaving for a reason. Yes, you have the guys who are really good and who are out there wanting more NIL money. I don't think that's who Purdue's going after. I don't think that's the game Purdue's playing. You're getting the guys who either want more playing time or want to take a step up and play at the Power 5 level. Card entered the portal because he wasn't going to start at Texas. Now, Quinn Ewers is very different. Quinn Ewers is very good. He's, was a perfect recruit on 247. He's really good. He's going to be a first-round NFL draft pick when he's done at Texas. But, Card entered the portal because he wasn't going to start somewhere. The easiest way, and this is not easy to do, but the easiest way to get great quarterback play is to recruit it. And that's not easy either, but it's easier than trying to find a guy out of the transfer portal who is capable of coming in, learning on the fly, and starting in year one, being ready to go. In regards to Aiden O'Connell, he'd be performing better, I think, but I don't know how much better it would be. He'd get the ball out quicker. The roster's limited, though. The roster is absolutely limited. There's only so much you can do with a bad offensive line, a not great offensive line, and a lack of explosive guys at receiver. A good question here, for the remainder of the year, what do you expect out of Ryan Walters with the limited resources that he has? I took this as limited resources, more of a question about, the personnel. Look, you got to continue evaluating. Know what you have. Know what guys you're excited about. Know what guys, I caution how I say this, but if, you're getting into an NIL spot, know what guys you're really prioritizing keeping. That's something that in this era of college football you've got to keep an eye on. You got to come up with that plan of attack. I think as a whole, this team has not been particularly exciting to watch. The offense doesn't create a ton of big plays. The defense doesn't create a lot of turnovers, it does create some sacks, but it doesn't have a ton of athleticism on the roster. You need to change that. You're never going to be, a juggernaut, a national championship contender, but what you can be is entertaining. And that's something that Jeff Brom really did a good job with at Purdue. That's something that Joe Tiller did a good job with at Purdue. It gets the fans fired up, and that's what you need. Does Purdue lack playmakers at the skill position, or does this boil down to a poor offensive line? Look, it's both. They kind of go hand in hand because the lack of playmakers exploits the poor offensive line more. But what I'd say is when you have playmakers, you can scheme around offensive line problems a little bit more. I would never say that, like Purdue had a good offense in 2018, Purdue had a good offense in 2021. Those were both legitimately good offenses. Were those offensive lines great? No. 2021 was the best, the best one Brom had probably, but it wasn't a great offensive line. 2017 was good too. But when you have playmakers like a Rondale Moore, like a David Bell, Milton Wright, to a lesser degree Jackson Anthrop, you can scheme around that. Right now, Purdue doesn't have that. In short yardage situations, why does Purdue not put the quarterback under center? Why is Purdue always in the shotgun? I understand the lack of push on the O-line, but to go 3 feet, it shouldn't take much. Look, I'll be frank here. I wonder if Purdue has an under center package outside of the victory formation. I'll note that is not uncommon for spread-heavy offenses. Both from the air raid style, the guys who are from that air raid tree, and guys who are just more spread guys, like a Lane Kiffin style offense. You watch Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin, they are never under center. But look, it can be effective. It's non-traditional. If you're more of the traditional football style, that's a very non-traditional look, but it can be effective. It comes down to 2 things. It comes down to the offensive line not getting a push. That is very much true. It comes down to Purdue not having running backs who are the run-through-you type. Devin Mockabee and Tyrone Tracy are both good backs, but neither of them is going to run you over. Be like a Braylon Allen type who in a short yardage spot is going to fall forward and, move you back 2 yards. And if you meet at the line of scrimmage, the running back is going to win. Purdue doesn't have that. When the stadium knows you're going to run, it's hard to run. It is hard to do. Purdue's not the only school that struggles with this. But it's, look, the shotgun thing, that's a schematic thing. It is. And that's something that Purdue is in on here. If you don't like it, that's fine. But it's not like it's something that can't work. And then finally, a bit of a conversation that started to spark up over on message boards quite a bit. Should Purdue welcome the additions of Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA as it starts to look ahead to 2024 and beyond? This, to me, entirely depends on your perspective, because you can justify this either way. And it's up to you with what you want. Do you want Purdue to play in bigger games against bigger brands, or do you want Purdue to win more? Because those 2 things are not likely to go hand in hand here. They're likely to be oil and water. It is very likely here that when these 4 schools come into the conference, you've seen Purdue's schedule for the next, 5 years? It's going to be tough to get, a ton of wins there. It is very unlikely that Purdue's going to get back to the 8-4 that it was in 2021, 2022. It's not impossible, but it's a hell of a lot more difficult. However, Purdue's going to play in some bigger games. You look at Purdue playing Southern Cal and Ohio State, Washington, or Oregon comes to West Lafayette next year. All of that, those are more games against bigger brands, bigger programs, new programs for fans to see. All of that is cool. All of that is fun. It just depends on what you want. Purdue and the Big Ten admitting these 4 schools was not something done to boost the lower guys competitively. It wasn't at all. It's all about the money. So, Purdue is taking more money here. Purdue's upping its level of competition greatly. Purdue has some really challenging non-conference schedules to go with it. Look, it's a brand new Big Ten, and starting next year, it is a brand new world of college football. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. Going from a 4 to a 12-team playoff is a radical change in the way the sport operates on a week-to-week basis. It is a radical change. The Big Ten and SEC being borderline overpowered in terms of the high-end brands that they each have, that is a radical change to the sport. It's going to look a lot different. Purdue will certainly feel it, and I think it won't take too long for us to know how big of an impact this has on the schools that are, in the bottom half of the Big Ten competitively next year moving forward. That's all I've got for the bye week. As I said, Thursday night I'll be recording the Purdue basketball preview episode. Send in questions on Twitter at BoilersBeyond or over email, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. And if you do send them in over Twitter, please give me a follow there. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that basketball episode. Later next week, we'll be back in the football grind. I'll preview Nebraska. I will probably also talk briefly about that Purdue basketball scrimmage at Arkansas with a couple of thoughts there, but it'll be a mostly football episode. No matter what here, I'll be talking about football post-game and previewing games all the way through the end of the season. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for spending time with me today. Send in those questions. Enjoy watching some games on the bye week. It is a loaded weekend of college football. And until next time, take care.